How do the people of Connecticut go about solving the state's problems? How do you make your voice heard? Join us now for a town hall meeting from Connecticut's Old State House. Renewing our democracy, what Connecticut can be. With Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill, and community leaders from across the state. Sponsored by Connecticut's Old State House, CTN, the Connecticut Network, the Office of the Secretary of the State, Everyday Democracy, and the Connecticut Humanities Council. Now, here's your host, Diane Smith.
Thank you for joining us at Connecticut's Old State House in downtown Hartford. Recently, the Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill, an organization called Everyday Democracy, and the National Conference on Citizenship got together to study the civic health of Connecticut. They issued their report on Connecticut's Civic Health Index in October. Well, our mission here at the Old State House and on CTN, the Connecticut Network, is to try to get people more engaged in our democracy. So we offered to share the report's findings and to start a conversation about how we can do better, a conversation we hope will spread across Connecticut. So for the next hour, or maybe a little more, our panel and our audience will get that discussion started right here in Hartford, the capital city. First, let me start with the Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for initiating this project in our state. Tell us a little about why you felt it was important.
Thank you, Diane, and it's great that we're doing this. I feel like I'm starting the conversation, not finishing it, and I'm very proud to be a co-sponsor of the first ever report on the civic health of the state of Connecticut. Why is this important? I will tell you why I think it's important. Because for the first time, we can objectively measure the civic involvement of our citizens on a number of broad measures. We've always tracked things like voter statistics and economic measures in the past, but we have never systematically tried to find out more about social behavior of the people of the state and how that connects to the way that people think about and act with their government. More importantly, I think it gives us a tool to develop new ways to encourage people to be involved in their democracy. That's really the point. It's not simply to measure things, it's to do something about it. The last thing I want is this to be another dismal report about how people aren't doing this and that, aren't voting, aren't participating, whatever it is. I don't think that's what this report says, by the way. But I think it's a call to action, and I think as we discuss some of the findings, you'll see why. What is striking about the report, and I will tell you just a couple of things, maybe to kind of launch us off in what this report really says, or what I think it says. And you can get a number of things from it, and as I'm sure we'll discuss later, you can find it online, you can read it online, and you can see the kind of broad reach it has. This is not just a report about how many people voted in the last election. This is about whether people interact with each other. Do you have dinner with your family on a regular basis, for example? Do you work with your neighbors in community projects? But also about voting behavior and about who the people are who are participating in our government and our society. I'll tell you one thing I think it tells me that I probably already knew, and that's that there are big gaps in our state. We know what they are. It's the old two Connecticuts. People who are poor, minority, generally in urban centers, don't participate as much in government as richer, whiter people. We know that in Connecticut. And it's consistent with our findings around education and other issues. What is interesting, though, about this report is that it shows that some people in these minority communities, or younger people, for example, who tend to participate less, relate to each other in different ways, and perhaps things that we hadn't noticed before. And maybe that can tell us something about where we need to find people, how we need to get them involved civically, and whether they are doing civic activity, but perhaps in a different way than we've been thinking about it. So that's one thing I really noticed. The other thing that's embedded here, and I think it is important to know and think about, is the fact that when it comes to voting participation, we always talk about how much participation there is among registered voters. Whenever you hear statistics about how many people voted in the last election, for example, you hear a percentage of registered voters. What it doesn't tell you is that almost a third of our citizens don't even register to vote. They're already out of the system before it even got started. That is, by the way, not different than any other state in the country. It's a pretty consistent statistic. But I wonder what that tells us about what are these people thinking? What are they doing? Why are they not even registering to vote? I mean, you hear it, and we can have a discussion about that tonight, because I'm sure many of us have read about this and thought about it a little bit and heard what people say. My vote doesn't count. Maybe it's apathy. You know, there are reasons out there. How do we attack that? How do we get a handle on, because those people are clearly doing something out there. They're relating to each other in some way, shape, or form. How do we make them understand that their civic involvement is important to the rest of us? And it is. I think our democracy rises and falls on whether or not we can get a sufficient number of people to feel connected to the rest of us. And that's what government is really all about. And I think it also says something, to my mind, about education. I think there is, you'll see, a gap between the number of participating voters, at least, and I'm here talking mostly about voting behavior, because that's, as chief elections officer, that's sort of my concern. There's a gap between younger and older voters. The World War II generation, in particular, votes in very large numbers. We all know that. Younger people are not as connected to their communities. Or perhaps they're connecting to each other in new and different ways that we have to figure out. They're obviously out there communicating a lot, but there are a lot newer ways to do that. And maybe government is not really filling that void, maybe not reaching out in the same way that we need to reach younger voters. But there's also something that I think may underlie that, and that is that the civic education that someone of my age, for example, received in the 1950s is not there anymore. There are reasons for that. Some of it, I believe, is testing. It's not tested. Citizenship is not tested. Not to say that there aren't many, many dedicated teachers out there trying to make community activities and civic involvement part of their curriculum. But it is not as much as it was taught in the same way that it was before. And some of us, including myself when I was in the legislature, we passed legislation saying you had to have a course in civics before you graduate from high school. Is that enough? I don't know, but I don't sense the same commitment of the newer generation to participation in the same way that I do sense it from the older generation. So again, I offer that out as food for thought. There's much more in this report. That's a few tidbits that I hope will get some conversation going. But I really look forward to getting input from you, the public, because that's the conversation we really need to have with each other. So thank you, Diane.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Martha Mccoy is the head of Everyday Democracy, which was one of the sponsors of this report, and she co-chaired the council. Martha, why don't you give us a few more tidbits about the report and what it shows?
Yeah, thanks, Diane, and thank you, Secretary Merrill, and to everyone here at the Old State House this evening, and our television audience, and people who may be downloading this later on. So as Secretary Merrill pointed out, it's really important to understand how we're doing in terms of our civic health. But civic health isn't a concept we hear about that often. It's not something that it's not in the air we breathe. I mean, once a year we might think, oh, how many people voted in the election? But we don't think about or get to see concepts like who had dinner with their families last night, who reached out to their neighbors, who worked with their neighbors to solve public problems, what percentage of people went to public meetings and who did that. And so I would say that even though we don't have a chance to watch the civic index like we watch the stock market go up and down a lot every day, we actually know that it's more important to watch the civic index even than to watch the Dow Jones. And the interesting thing about our society is that we don't measure this often, and really we measure the things we care about, right? I mean, that's why we have whole programs dedicated to watching the stock market. But, you know, we don't have anything like that dedicated to our civic health. And so I would say that it's really important for us to look at this, and it's important to look at civic health in terms of our participation, but also our connection to each other, and also what it means to have a voice. And if all those things are in place, we will be a better state. If our civic health is stronger, and that's why we pay attention to the index, if we can make our civic health stronger, we will have better schools for everyone. We will have safer neighborhoods for everyone. We will have young children across the state from every race and income group ready to start school when they start school. That is why it's so important to look at our civic health. And sometimes people think civic health is a nice thing. How you connect with others, how you volunteer, how you participate. And I'd say it goes way beyond being nice. Being nice could be part of it, but it really is something that is substantively connected to our problem solving. So, how are we doing on the connecting to each other part of the index? The Civic Health Index report examines various indicators of social connectedness and participation. One surprising finding is that only 7% of Connecticut residents report working with their neighbors to address local community problems. That ranks us 37th in the nation. We also rank low on exchanging favors with neighbors, 32nd in the nation. And I think it's safe to say that in the last few weeks, those statistics have probably gone up a fair amount.
It's amazing what a snowstorm will do.
But it's also important to look at the way we reported that behavior when we didn't perceive that there was an immediate crisis going on. We rank low on attending public meetings. Only 10% of us attend public meetings. Now, I suspect that that has something to do with the way our public meetings are often structured, and it's something we can talk about. We also have some strengths to build on. Secretary Merrill talked about our voting patterns. We also rank high on donating to charity. We're 6th in the nation, which we should be because of the relative wealth of our state. And also I'd like to point out that giving to charity is a fairly solitary act of civic engagement. And we are relatively high in belonging to groups, which is great because that's a strength that we can build on. We can also build on our relative strengths in volunteering and in discussing politics. We rank 15th in the nation on volunteering, and we rank 12th, I believe, on discussing politics. But one of the most striking patterns in the Civic Health Report is that there are large gaps in the levels and types of civic engagement, and Secretary Merrill began to talk about this. On nearly all indicators, levels of participation correspond with wealth, education level, and race and ethnicity. So there is a big disconnect here that we need to pay serious attention to. For example, African Americans are more likely to be involved in religious institutions than are whites. The same is true for Latinos. Asian Americans are more likely to be involved in certain kinds of community groups than are whites. But all of these groups are often underrepresented in forms of participation that have an impact on public policy, where their voice would be absolutely essential to solving the problems that we face. So, and I meant to mention women in that as well. Women are in the same category because they're often connected to community groups more often than are men, but they are less likely to be represented in bodies where the voice of women are required. So as a state, we are not doing very well at creating a bridge from community engagement to political participation. And we're going to be hearing from two people who've been creating those bridges. So the largest immediate predictor of anyone participating, whether voting, attending a public meeting, taking a leadership role, is that they were asked. So gaps in participation happen because there are differences in who gets asked. So finally, what difference does all this make? So if we create opportunities for meaningful voice and participation for everyone, then we can make a difference on the issues where the gaps between rich and poor are affecting everyone's quality of life in our state. And because of the striking segregation in our state, we have to think innovatively about how we create connections between people of different backgrounds so we can actually discover that we do have common problems and work on them together. So in closing, we do have work to do, but we have a lot of strengths to build on. We have a lot of energy, which I know a lot of it is represented in this room. We have stories and models to look at, and we have connections that we can build on. So I'd say this is a great time to launch a statewide conversation about civic health in our state.
Well, let's do it. Thank you, Martha. I'd like to turn to our next panelist. Martha mentioned the gap between the two Connecticuts. Luis Caban is with us. He's the executive director of the Southside Institution Neighborhood Alliance, known as SINA, in Hartford. Luis, can you give me a description from what you've heard Martha say and what you know about the report of where people are falling through the gaps in the Latino community?
Well, I think the one major item that the report perhaps doesn't explicitly point to is the burden of working for a living, and how much time do you have available for citizenship participation in matters of community that are external perhaps to matters of your children, or matters of your family. They're more for the general community, for your neighborhood. I think that's a very key. There's also some other issues, of course, in terms of Latinos. We have a language issue. Our community is a very young community. So we have a larger percentage of population under the age of 18, therefore not eligible to participate in elections per se, and we also have a sizable non-citizen population that can't vote regardless of age. So these are, I think, are areas, and there are, for those of you who have not read the report, there are quite a host of excellent recommendations for dealing with things that are considered barriers, some of them specifically to Latinos. But I would say that the language issue, and then the consideration of the efficacy of your vote, and therefore and the burden of making a living.
Denise, I think that you made a comment before about Latinos and the rate at which they register and vote that I thought was kind of interesting.
Yes. The statistic that we have is that about 46% of the eligible Latino voters actually register, but only about half of those who register actually vote.
Luis, why do we think that is? Is it a problem with people getting to the polls? If you bother to go out and register to vote, it seems like you'd want to get to the polling place.
Well, it's how much you think an effort to do that will give you a return. There's a sense that government and politicians in particular are not responding to our needs, and so some folks would say, I don't endorse that, but some folks would say that not voting is a rational decision. I don't agree that, but I think that's a big part of it. That folks are kind of frustrated with the degree to which elected officials are responding and taking care of the issues that you consider important for you, your family, and your community.
So, Teresa, then Teresa Younger is the head of the Permanent Commission on the Status of Women. How do women make their voices heard so that politicians do hear what their concerns are?
Well, there are a variety of ways that can happen. I think, one of the things we need to understand is that women make up 51% of the state's population, and they volunteer more than men. They are more philanthropic than men, and they are actually more active in their communities than men. Their voices are still not heard. They are the only majority population that is represented as a minority, which I think really says a lot. But part of that is that, they are juggling many, many things. It goes back to what Lewis was saying about sometimes you have to work, you have to pay the bills. Women also have a variety of responsibilities, and they are not running for political office as often as they should, and they do not see themselves in leadership roles as often as they should. And so, they're not necessarily fully participating to the degrees that they should or could be. And so it's really important that we need to, they need to have their voices heard outside of where they are. They need to make sure that they know who their elected officials are and have a relationship with them. and then they need to consider running for political office or working on political campaigns, so that, and that could be anything from handing out pamphlets to, being the treasurer of a political campaign to being the campaign manager, but they need to be at the table. And one of the things that we know, in fact, a Harvard study just said this the other day, when you have diverse voices at the table, the group is smarter. A Harvard study just came out and said that, the more women that you have at the table, the group is smarter. And when you have a smarter group, they make smarter decisions. And when you have a smarter group that makes smarter decisions, they make decisions that are going to be better for society. And I think that's really important. And, we need to have more than 30%. We have state boards and commissions, and the state boards and commissions in this state have about 38% women on them. Really should have much higher. And yet women of color and communities of color are down below 5%. In fact, in the Latino community, it's below 2%.
Teresa, one of the things that Martha McCoy said was that people get involved more when they are asked.
Yes.
Do women run for office if they're asked?
Women run for office if they are asked. This is, this, that I work with the Women's Campaign School at Yale, and one of the things we oftentimes say is, a man wakes up and says, I'm going to run for office. A woman wakes up and says, how many things do I need to do to prepare myself to run for office so that I can get that done? We need to be the experts in something before we run for office. But, the key thing is we have to be asked.
Yeah.
And we have to be asked 3 times before we say yes.
Denise, have you done a good job on that? Obviously, as a woman who's been involved in elective office for a long time, do we go out and try to court women and others to run?
Or, in fact, anyone. I mean, it's a very passive system. I was thinking back to what Luis was saying about, when we said that there are large numbers of Latinos who register but they don't vote. It's probably some plucky candidate who came to their door or knows them in their community and said, hey, register to vote so you can come vote for me. That's a lot easier than actually getting people there to vote. So it's a passive system. We wait for candidates, third parties, really, to ask people to get involved. And as far as women being involved, I mean, I have to laugh because I think back to my own family. Really the way I got involved in politics is my mother, we were Irish, I was in an Irish Catholic neighborhood, everybody had lots of kids, all the moms stayed home, and my mother was like the welcome wagon for, I have to admit, the Democratic Party. So when a family moved to my neighborhood, my mother got them over the dining room table and signed them up for the party. That's how it worked. That's how the Irish fought their way into the system. Every group has done that, and it's a question of how organized you are about it. But women were doing things. They were just not at the big table. They were down here doing the work. So it's interesting when you think about that system. And I go back to my statement that maybe we need to change the way we're asking people.
Interesting idea. Hyacinth Yenny is head of the Maple Avenue NRZ, which is a grassroots organization that does a lot of work in Hartford in the various different NRZs. Explain to us, to people who don't know, what is an NRZ?
It's a neighborhood revitalization group. Each neighborhood group does have a plan for their neighborhood. And what we do is work on that plan to improve our neighborhoods. It's about the development of, economic development, public safety, education, a lot of any things that comes to our way we work on. Ordinance, policies, stuff like that.
How do you get people to show up for your meetings and to participate in your NRZ? And we had 2 people who mentioned, women are busy and so sometimes can't fit these things in. Well, you're busy.
Well, I'm kind of a multitask person, and I like to do a lot of different things. However, the way I get people to come to my meeting, by calling them on the telephone. I wouldn't, I call. Every month I'm on that telephone calling people and telling them why it's so important for them to come out to meetings to address the issues. And I usually have, city government at the meeting to make sure any issues they have that it gets addressed. And we usually get stuff done, and because they know I'm getting stuff done, they always come back. But I do make sure I have that personal connection with them, and that's really important.
And that's really key, I think, is, thank you so much, is having people feel that they're accomplishing something. Dr. Alex Geertzma is here with us. Doctor, if you'd stand up, please. He's the chairman of the board on the Connecticut Commission on Children. One of the things that you have found is that parents will get involved, but only if they feel that they're really making a difference.
Yes, Diane, and,
Get out of your way so the camera can get you here.
I've always been a real fan of children and families, and I think one of the things that the Commission has discovered over the years, and particularly through a very, very important program called the Parent Leadership Training Institute, which is now being spread throughout the country. It was originated here in Connecticut. We found that parents not only need to be asked, but they need to feel that what they're being asked to do is relevant and relevant to their children. There is no more passionate group of people advocating for the well-being of another group of people than parents for children.
But you make the point that they have to feel it's relevant.
Yes.
Are we sometimes just asking people to show up for something and they feel, well, that made no difference, why did I bother to do that?
Well, my personal experience with this, with another agency, another group called the Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs program for the Department of Public Health, has been, yes, in the beginning, people were asking, how can we get parents involved? Who can we possibly ask? Will they really show up to the meetings? Once they were given a true role in the advisory council, we couldn't stop them. They come, they participate, and the important thing, much like with the Parent Leadership Training Institute, when they become more knowledgeable about the particular issues that face their children, in the case of the Children with Special Health Needs program, the children with special health care problems that are chronic, they will be the first to move ahead. They will be able to push the agenda. They have more energy and are, in fact, leaders of a lot of these processes.
Dr. Gersman, just one last question, and that is you actually have a toolkit that you've put together, which is part of what's spreading across the country, to teach people how to get involved. Because one of the things that the Commission found was that people don't necessarily know how to be involved. So what do you teach them with the toolkit?
You know, I'm going to just grab my notes here because I'm not a real expert on the actual curriculum. But this is what I've been told, basically, that people who engage in the curriculum is a little over 20 weeks worth of time that parents commit to over a period of time, in addition to an individual civics project that they engage in with. It actually helps their community. So they learn how to speak publicly. They learn what public policy is, how budgets work, how to improve community health, safety, and learning, how to work with people who are different than they are, how to problem solve as a group and community, how to create a coalition of different groups toward a shared goal, not an easy task, obviously, how to understand data and make decisions using the best research, how to understand leadership and power and what that all means and how it's manifested, how to see the role of the family in the community, how our state and local and federal leaders are and how to reach them, who they are and how to reach them, and how to partner with schools, neighborhood organizations, and government.
Well, I think that's key because I think a lot of people don't really know how to do that. Nancy Thomas is with us from the Democracy Imperative. Nancy, if you don't mind standing up. Denise mentioned that people aren't learning civics in school the way they used to. She sponsored a bill to bring it back into school. Maybe one semester in high school is not enough. Maybe people need a lot more training. I'm going to have you turn this way because that camera's going to get you right there.
All right.
Okay.
I love the curriculum that was just outlined. That would be terrific. One of the problems, of course, has been No Child Left Behind has left the curriculum really packed with basics. And we need the basics, but we also need the basics about civics. So learning civics is really a developmental process. And there are things that kids can learn in elementary school, basics like how to get along, how to manage conflict. And then things in high school, middle school, how does a bill become a law? What are the basics in government? Then they need to go on to college and they need to learn maybe arguably a more sophisticated curriculum, things like what does it mean to live in a democracy? What are democratic principles and practices? And then, even then, how do you take that and translate it into problem solving, public problem solving, solutions, and doing that in ways that are collaborative so they can work across differences. One other thing I just want to say about education, though, is that it is a mixed bag. And the reason it's a mixed bag is if you look at the statistics in the report, you'll see that across the board, every civic indicator, there is a gap between those with college education and those without. And what we have to be very careful not to do is increase the gap as a result of action strategies in this report. So we don't want to continue to leave people behind, and we don't want to widen that particular gap. For example, more people with a college degree are likely to contact their elected officials. They are likely to write a letter to the editor. They are likely to be asked to volunteer and to serve on state commissions. We have to be very careful not to let that pattern repeat itself.
Luis, how do we do that then? If we can't send everybody to college, which would be nice, to close the gap that way, how do we close that gap?
Oh, goodness. Well, I wanted to comment on Hyacinth's comments.
Please do.
And her NRZ. I mean, there are a number of NRZs in the city who are somewhat envious of the amount of participation that Hyacinth gets at the NRZ. And I think the critical factor there is just how she pushes to hold public officials accountable. And I think people, whether their particular issue is resolved or whether it's addressed or not, they appreciate the fact that public officials are coming before them to answer to issues of public policy and of their responsibility to community and to voters, of course. How do we close the gap? I think we have to be quite active in terms of a number, probably a very comprehensive approach. I'm very much a big supporter of citizenship education, especially amongst the young. But I think we also should focus very early in high school, where you have youngsters who will be of voting age in a very, very few years. And I think it's very critical to get them involved in terms of what's going on in the field of public policy, and particularly in electoral politics. The national organization on whose board I sit has a project called SET, Students for an Educated Democracy. Every federal election, we have several weeks in school where in the high schools where the social studies departments actually focus their efforts on the election, on who's running. The students role play as candidates. Some play the role of elections officials. They actually cast ballots in the lobby and tally and analyze and look at the results. And they're quite active. These young people graduate from high school with a very, very, very good sense of how politics works in Chicago, and a very good look at it in a broader spectrum.
Well, here are some students who are learning kind of on the job, members of Congressman John Larson's Youth Council. Matt, tell us a little bit about what you do as part of the Youth Cabinet.
Well, as in our youth cabinet, we usually have monthly meetings to discuss issues that are affecting students in the 1st District, which is the 1st Congressional District for the House of Representatives, and see and recommend to Congressman Larson how we can effectively shape federal policy to fit the needs of students. And recently we just released a report to the congressman that's would eventually be presented to the House Democratic Caucus about the civic health and about the status of youth and children in the 1st District. Going back to other people's comments, we need to, the youth of Connecticut and the youth of this entire country, we need to feel like we're a national resource. Even though we do not technically have legal suffrage, we are a resource that needs to be tapped and feel appreciated. And that is the way to engage us, along with effective civic education that actually not only teaches us the Constitution, but ways to get involved in politics.
What kind of civics education have you had in high school?
Well, in ninth grade, I took a required honors civics class that gave us a general outline of the Constitution and gave us a outline of how our local government works. But it doesn't exactly tell us that we should vote. It doesn't tell you the value of our vote or how we can get involved civically and how voting really affects our lives.
Denise?
We got work to do.
Something you've been talking
That's
about
right.
and advocating for. Matt, thank you very much.
Well, I think great.
It gets right back to the courses that you've been suggesting and pushing for.
Yes, and I'm glad to hear it's bearing some fruit. Congratulations, you guys sound like you're doing good work.
I think we have to remember, Diane, also that the personal is political, and people can do things within their own communities. We oftentimes are thinking of very broad, big pictures. We're thinking national or federal, and it's right in your own backyard. And the first engagement for civic activities, which goes back to what Louise was saying, is really the fact that many people are engaged in their churches or in their social service groups, and you're voting in those social service groups, and you're understanding the issues that are coming to the table, and now we just have to take it one step further. And, you know, that's really important, that we understand that it's going to happen on local levels, and that's critically important, and that's why the PLTI program is so successful, because it's about parents and children. It's a direct link. So we need to make sure that we keep that connection going all the way through, and people need to identify what's most important to them within their local communities so they can become engaged.
If anybody in our audience wants to get in on the discussion, please raise your hand. We have people with microphones. Hannah, we have Mike McGarry right in the front row there. Mike, just introduce yourself and go ahead with your comment.
Yeah, I'm Mike McGarry, kind of a local troublemaker, as some of the people here know. I'm going to cause a little trouble here right now because you're really missing a point. The most destructive factor in a lack of civic involvement is the car tax. From the guys on Park Street that run around with the Massachusetts cars, to my friend in West Hartford who's 90 and has Florida plate, to the people who live over here in Hartford 21 and have their car registered in Rocky Hill. A whole level of society hides out and won't get involved. Then the Cathedral of St. Joseph, we don't get many envelopes. We get a lot of dollars and tens. We get very few envelopes because those people are hiding out. They don't want to be known in Connecticut because of the car tax. And in the cities, the horrible insurance rates. So that's what chases a lot of people away. And that's what state government should fix. Governor Merrill said that. But the Democrats, the party of the people, surprisingly don't even speak about that. So I think that's something the legislature should really attend to.
Well, Mike, thank you. Denise, I'm going to ask you if you've ever heard that brought up before as something blocking civic involvement. Mike, as we know, has been a city councilman and has been involved in a lot of grassroots groups.
I haven't heard it put together in precisely that way, but I mean, I know there is a problem because the car tax. I mean, he's speaking to he's giving an example of a perhaps larger question, which is that people, particularly those without means, really there is an underground economy out there and on lots of different levels. The car tax, the difference. He's speaking about the difference between the car tax that's charged in cities versus suburbs and some of the reasons that people do things to stay away from government. But that's not the only example. And that is something that probably does impact the way people interact with their government. And, you know, I don't know what to say about that.
I don't mean to put you on the spot for whether that should go away or not. But
right. Thank you.
Diane, I also think that Mike's point touches on whether someone wants to surface and be seen and known in a community if they're in fact violating a law because they have a registered car somewhere other than their residence. And so I don't know to what degree that is an issue, but it's a very, very interesting perspective on that regressive tax.
Speaking of an interesting perspective, I want to introduce Chris DeSoto, everyone, from the Catholic Worker House in Hartford. He has been working for a long time with people who are disenfranchised, and lately Chris has also been involved in Occupy Wall Street and in Occupy Hartford. And Chris, you see people every day who feel that they're not a part of the bigger community.
Well, for the last 20 years, our family has lived in the north end of Hartford with some of the most disenfranchised people in our nation. And before I continue, I want to just object to the notion that we couldn't send everybody to college. We could certainly send every American to we could send every resident of America to college if we had different federal funding priorities. We never say we can't fight this war because we won't come up with the money for it. We could send everybody to college. In terms of why I think folks are disenfranchised in our North End neighborhood, it's because they have been alienated from the system, because they have been isolated by decades of policies that have abandoned them to the neighborhood. They don't feel as though their voice is heard. So the first slide, the question was listening to the voices. People have a voice, but do folks in positions of power, are they within earshot? And so I would urge those people in power, not just elected power, but people who have the power of white privilege, people who have the power of class privilege, people who have time privilege, to come to the North End. We have plenty of homes up there. I invite those people to come, not to gentrify our neighborhood, but to integrate our neighborhood, move into our neighborhood. You want stimulating conversations, you want to see the effects of social problems from a different perspective, then speak to somebody who comes from that different perspective by being in our neighborhood. Open a business in our neighborhood. We need some businesses in our neighborhood. There's plenty of open storefronts, vacant lots that have been vacant since the riots of '68, waiting to be developed. The onus to do this is on people who have the privilege of race and class, because we've seen when minority folks move to white neighborhoods or when poor folks move to middle-class neighborhoods that the middle class and the white folks leave. It's time for the middle class and the white folks to come back and engage in building a community.
Chris, let me ask you a little bit about the Occupy Hartford and Occupy Wall Street movements, because you've been involved in both. It strikes me that this is a whole different type of way of people getting involved and having their voices heard. And the reason I say it's completely different is that it's really a case of organizing horizontally. It's not coming from the top. There's not a union chief or a political leader who says, show up at Turning Point Park and bring your signs.
Well, it's self-organization. If people's voices aren't being heard, then they need to gather together. You've seen it on the news when they do what's called the people's mic. If you're not going to be given a mic to have your voice amplified, then if you can gather as a community, you can amplify each other's voice. The great community organizer Saul Alinsky reduced the definition of power quite succinctly. Power is organized money in organized people. The people of Hartford might not have money to organize, but we have people, and we can organize, and we can be heard.
Do you think the people in Occupy Hartford are being heard?
I think so. I think they could be heard some more. One of the limitations of Occupy Hartford, one of the limitations of elected government is the question of the privilege of time. It was brought up earlier. Who has the time to do this? And we need to acknowledge that having time to be involved in these things is a privilege. The moms that I work with on my street in my neighborhood, they're not privileged with time to spare. They're obliged to care for their children and to help each other care for each other's children. Plenty of civic engagement. One of the things we do is we welcome homeless folks into our home. Nobody in my neighborhood sees that as remarkable, because nearly everybody in my neighborhood has somebody sleeping on their couch or sleeping in their spare room. Plenty of civic engagement going on.
And Martha, isn't that one of the things that the report found in Connecticut, that among lower income people there is more involvement,
Yes.
neighbor to neighbor,
Yes.
and exchanging favors, things like that?
Yes, exactly. And again, being translated into being heard is a different matter. And so when people look at that and they think, oh, that's a gap, they might mistakenly think that's a gap in caring. It's not a gap in that at all. It's a gap in being heard. So.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. My name is Immaculate Can. What I wanted to ask the panel is, have you heard of a program called Running Start, Young Women in Politics? My youngest child participated in a week-long program with Running Start in Washington, D.C., where she had the opportunity to meet with Dee Dee Myers, Rosa DeLaura, and she came back after spending the week in Washington, D.C., fired up. And now she's participating, getting involved in her local community, volunteering with, different politicians, et cetera, and thinking of running in the future. So I'm saying, why aren't we emulating a program like that at a local level? And I think Running Start is trying to reach out to young ladies, teach them about the importance of getting involved in politics. But we should look at those particular programs and see how we can, put that intervention at a local level.
Programs that are doing that? I know you're also involved with the Girl Scouts.
Right. I was just going to say there are programs out there that are doing that. I think sometimes they're the best kept secret, and sometimes finding a voice and advocating sometimes gets looked poorly upon. But I do know the Girl Scouts, and I know Girls Inc. I know there are Girls State. There are organizations in the state that are specifically designed in all-girl environments for girls to find their voice and to become involved and to learn about what actions they can take to move their way up. And, you know, the Girl Scouts has a very strong advocacy component that, you know, talks about how do you connect, take action, and move forward with things. So I think there are those programs out there, and I think if you have a young person who is interested, all you have to do is Google. It sounds odd, but, you know, technology, which we haven't talked about yet, technology is a wonderful way. And when people just get a little tiny bit engaged, it lights a fire. And we see that happen all the time. I'll tell you, I just came back last night at midnight from the National Girl Scout Convention. We had 1,200 girls from across the country, plus another 600 girls that were delegates, so 1,800 girls between the ages of 14 and 18 actively engaged in empowerment, talking about civic engagement, what are they doing in their communities, and we know that young people want to take action. We know that they have a voice, and we know that they want to be heard, and we just have to ask them to the table. And once we get them there, we need to be able to allow them to prioritize for them what the priorities are. You know, at the PCSW, we recognized that there were no young women leaders between the ages of 18 and 35 represented at in the General Assembly. 35-year-old men, younger men, 24-year-old men were getting elected, but young women were not. And so we had some young women who came to us and said, you know, we want to organize. And we said, fine, whatever way works best for you. And those young women, of which we have a steering committee, come together, they network, they do outreach activities, they do volunteer activities, and they set legislative priorities that we at the PCSW incorporate in to the priorities that we take over to the General Assembly and work on. So it's really important that we ask, we find out where those answers are, and we get our young people involved and engaged. And congrats to your daughter. I hope she runs, and have her contact us.
Denise, did you want to comment on that?
Well, now might be the time to say that we have this very active advisory committee, and we know there are lots of programs going on out there, particularly at the local level. And we're going to try to get all those stories and put them in one place so everyone can find them and we can build on them. That's the next activity. The advisory group we put together is raring to go. They see this as the first step in this conversation. So just to your point, there's a lot going on out there. We just have to find it.
How can people reach out and be part of that?
Well, we do have, it's mostly been done through Everyday Democracy, but my website, the SOTS website, Secretary of the State, ct.gov, is going to have all the information about it. And we are going to reach out and try to build on these programs. If they're working, let's find out what they're doing and try to get some inspiration out there. I think that's really our goal.
Here's a program that's working, and I thank you so much for coming up from Stratford, right, Olga? Olga Pena is here, and she worked with Everyday Democracy to help put together a group called CARE, Citizens Addressing Racial Equity in Stratford. What's the point of the group? What was the intention?
Well, the intention was to get people to talk in our community, to see that there are differences, but we are building bridges to understand each other, engaging the police department, the education department, the Board of Education, as well as the leaders in town. I mean, we have a lot of work to do, but we were able to do a survey with the police action team and to find out that it was more positive than we thought. We've been able to look at the Board of Education in terms of emulating having a more diverse teaching population, have diversity training. So our action teams are really working hard, trying to get new members to get and talk, have conversation. Really, it's a matter of influencing each other and understanding that we're pretty much the same, but there are a lot of differences. When it comes to politics, there's the old boys club, you know, it's the unspoken that we don't see. So it's very subliminal. And that's what we need to talk. And when you talk about engaging different people from backgrounds, whether it be a Hispanic, a black, or African American, or even young adults, I think we need to look at technology. All our kids, all our youth really does a lot of texting. Even if we were able to change our system so that we vote from our telephones, I mean, this is something to think about. So again, through the PTSAs, I'm involved with the PTA. I've been involved volunteering for many years, 10 years now. And one of the things that I find, I agree with the people that were speaking, is if your child is involved in something, you're going to apt to be more involved. Stratford Academy is a school that I'm proud to be the president, PTA member. And we have an organization called Junior Achievement that does engage children in civic. I mean, that's all volunteer-based. Now, the funding, unfortunately, like everything else, is dwindling. But we need to we got community people, business people come into our school every year, and we've been doing this. The only school in town that's been doing this. Our kids are really, I mean, you have to start from when they're in kindergarten, and believe me, these children understand. So I think that all in all, our community is working to make it better. We've got a long way to go, like every other community.
Thank you very much. If anybody else in the audience wants to participate, please raise your hand. We have a number of mics going around. Nancy, I'm just going to skip over to the gentleman next to you first, because he's been trying to catch my eye for a minute. Tell us a little bit about the Civic Life Project.
My name is Dominique Lasser. I'm actually a documentary filmmaker. I've done programming for national PBS for a lot of time. And 3 years ago, we decided to try to see whether we could engage young people in civics and in their democracy by having them make film. And we started in one school in Northwest Connecticut and realized that they were so comfortable with the medium that they absolutely excelled. They had a problem when they realized that they had to go meet people face to face. But so we're developing the second year we were in 3 schools, and now we're working with 7 schools across the state to develop a curriculum that will allow civics to be taught or social studies to be taught by having students make their own film. They do their research, they choose a subject, they meet adults, they interview adults, and then they present their film to their community. And we found that it's been extraordinarily successful and powerful experience for them. So what's very encouraging is that I think as soon as you give the students, young people, a challenge, they rise to the challenge in an amazing way, and they demand to be engaged. So I think that there's a lot of optimism if everybody gets involved, and I think the school is a place to start.
Thank you very much. We have the Deputy Secretary of the State here, Jamie Spallone. I just wanted to touch on a topic. Would you mind standing up? A topic that Olga mentioned. What about looking at ways, and I'm going to step around you so that the camera can get you. What about ways of making voting easier? I don't know if we're ready to vote on our telephones. That was her suggestion. But what about trying to make voting more available?
Well, there's both the issue of voting and the issue of voter registration to get people in the door in the first place so that they can vote. And while there could be some security issues and so forth with voting by internet or by your phone, certainly Secretary Merrill is interested in online voter registration. And if people can do everything in their lives on their telephone, on their computer, it seems they should be able to register to vote that way. So that's certainly a project that our office is interested in. And if I could just briefly speak to the issue of the 1/3 of adults who don't register to vote, that results in a diminishing return too during campaigns when people will go out and the campaigns will use what we call primed lists in politics. And so you're reaching out only to those who are registered to vote and then only to those who have a history of voting. So things like Election Day registration and other ways that make it easier to register can also expand that pool of people who might engage in the political process.
Is that something that we should be looking for eventually, is same-day registration?
Yeah, it's certainly something that answers a lot of questions in terms of people we have a more mobile society. We have among younger voters who move around a lot, and in terms, again, of people who might engage in the political debate late in the game. So, and as we have better technology in keeping a voter file, we can move in that direction.
Thank you. That point about the diminishing returns was very interesting. Hadn't thought about that. Val Ramos, why don't you join us now? Stand up for us, if you will. Val was one of the authors of this report. Val, out of the discussion that has arisen since the report came out, where do you think we're moving as a result of now identifying what our strengths and weaknesses are?
Well, Diane, I think that one of the key points that the report highlighted and that we're addressing here is the importance of having conversation. I think, and having conversation at the local level and moving to the regional level, to the state level. And that is a starting point, I think, for building connectedness, for defining some of the problems that we have to address and overcoming differences. So I think those are some of the key points.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to try to move the conversation forward a little bit. Nancy, I know I promised that you'd have another chance to speak, so let me just give you a moment, and then I'll be right with you, Julia.
What I was going to say is just so fast. When students are civically engaged, and we've heard so many great examples of programs, they actually stay in school. So the value of civic education is improved retention and graduation rates.
Well, certainly in our cities, that's something that we're very interested in, for sure. Julia Evans-Starr is with us. You're with the Commission on Aging, and we've been talking a lot about young people, but as people in our state, as the population ages, and as people's retirements last longer because people are living longer, there is a whole segment of people that we want to make sure that we're including in civic engagement.
That's absolutely right. First, if I could, just tip my hat to Secretary Merrill for your leadership and for this report, and for your fine facilitation.
Thank you.
It's been said that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and this is proof today. It's alive and well. And also want to acknowledge CTN for their daily work to bring state government into everybody's family room. It's very important public service. That being said, the older adult population, two very dramatic things are taking place. As you referred to, people are living longer. In the early 1900s, average life expectancy was 47 years of age. Flash forward 100 years, and average life expectancy is around 80 now. At the same time, we're an old state. Everybody knows that. We're the 7th oldest state in the nation, and we're becoming even grayer. So by 2030, our 65-plus population is going to increase by 64%. And typically, the dialogue around the older adult conversation is about the burden that's going to be placed on national, state, and local budgets. And the Commission on Aging is working on solutions that we think are a win-win. But what's often overlooked is the opportunities. You know, if you look at baby boomers alone, they represent baby boomers, people born between 1946 and 1964, probably the majority of folks in this room. They're 1 million strong in Connecticut. They're a third of our population. And when you talk about time, they have some time. And they're entering this other stage of their life when they're looking toward fulfilling their passion and doing work that's filled with purpose. And so I think it's really important that we harness that energy and those folks, and many of you in the room, to help make a difference. You know, just today I was at an event that honored countless volunteers who were baby boomers and older adults, and it's really remarkable what's taking place. And so I hope moving forward we can make critical connections and kind of feature the stellar work that's being done.
Well, thank you very much. I also wanted to talk to someone who represents service organizations. And Julianne, why don't you get up and join us? One of the things that Julianne does, of course, is Connecticut Rotary. And I think that sometimes in our day-to-day lives, there are a lot of people who don't consider the work the service organizations can do and the manpower that's available out there.
Yeah, we are the group that civic organizations can come to kind of partner with. We involve the members of the clubs, and some come from money, but come from manpower. We're finding that clubs that are in smaller cities that are vibrant are diverse, they are active, they're involved in their communities, and at the same time we all are a little suffering from the economy as it is. Social clubs like this are membership clubs, and I'm talking Lions, Exchange Club, Kiwanis, as well as Rotary. So that hurts a little, but Rotary is looking into that and finding ways to get those members in so they can get involved. At the same time, when service clubs provide service with the community, they're bringing members in, but there's a fellowship angle. Doing service together for your community can be fun, and they encourage other fellowship. You know, we have a picnic together with the spouses and the families. This becomes healthier for the people who are actually providing the service to the communities, and so they grow. So say to you, not only are we a good forum, which was brought up as one of the things of coming to them to bring together meetings civic-wise. We in Rotary cannot be political, but what we're talking about isn't political. We're talking about civic involvement. And I am sure that many of the clubs would be honored to help put that together for you. So, you know, our little organizations are there to help. We also involve elders, and we also are very active in high schools. And now we're pushing ourselves with groups in middle schools to give the students ideas of how to run meetings, how to get involved in service, and how to help others. So it's growing up and becoming more active, involved adults as they get into the community.
Julianne, thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes left, so I want to encourage anyone who has not spoken yet but who wants to get a word in edgewise to please raise your hand and we'll come to you. Catherine, I'll be right there. Or, Mike, can you bring Catherine a microphone? First, let me just speak to Werner Oyanadel, who's from LIPRAC. What's your comment on all of this?
Well, I wanted to comment on the question of voting participation. We said, it was stated earlier about the low voter percentage for Latinos. And I was thinking how, for the general population, voting participation in a non-presidential election is still very low. Mm-hmm. But I'm optimistic, because if you were to look at the voter participation of Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico, that percentage it's in the high 90s. So I am confident that we can have a more engaged involvement in our voters. And that's why I want to commend the Deputy Secretary of the State for speaking about same-day registration. I guess the question that I would have to the Secretary of the State would be, how likely is it that with our support and the Secretary of the State's support, we can have the legislature pass this legislation in the upcoming year?
Denise?
Well, that will be one of the recommendations coming from the task force that I have together on another front to look at election performance. And that certainly has been seen to raise voter participation in the states that have it. As a matter of fact, there was just a referendum in Maine. One group tried to do away with it for whatever reason. And the people of the state rose up by referendum and insisted that it be put back. I think people want it to be for them. It's a system for the voters, not for the people running the voting system. So election day registration is probably an idea whose time has come as far as I'm concerned, and I think there is a lot of support for it. You know, as we get better and better technology, better and better ways to check voter lists and make sure that it's a secure system and that everyone's voting with integrity, I think it's not far away. And hopefully that will help. I mean, it's a complicated thing why people do or don't vote. But some of it probably is about whether they feel that welcomed, I guess is the word, and we keep talking about this, but I think that is a big part of it. And so that's why these kinds of conversations, frankly, are so important, so that people know, yeah, we notice that you're not there. We want you in. We don't want you on the outside. And I think that's maybe one of the most important things that could come from all this.
Luis, I think you had something you wanted to say?
If I might add, I think that same-day registration coupled with, to backtrack, Werner mentioned Puerto Rico. One of the things in Puerto Rico is that Election Day is a holiday. That's right. So, you know, that's a big one. And so I said coupled with same-day registration, I think that it would probably be very difficult to change the federal election, but at least for elections that are not held on the first day of November, on the Tuesday in November, that we change that election day to a Saturday and make it a 24-hour period. Yeah. That deals with the burden of time on those who work Monday to Friday trying to feed their families, and it broadens the time period of which even if you do work on a Saturday, you can still go and vote.
Interesting idea, Denise. Is that something that you're thinking about?
That's also in our report. And after all, shouldn't it be a festival? Shouldn't it be a holiday? Shouldn't it be something we celebrate? Yeah. I'm all for it. Whatever way we can manage to get it done, it really does make a difference. And that's why I got this, when I heard about the Puerto Rican voting behavior, I was, what are they doing down there? You know, and it's like 95% turnout. It's a big deal to vote in Puerto Rico. It's a holiday. It's something they celebrate. I think it's great. We used to have election cake in this country years ago.
Catherine Kane is with us. Catherine is the head of the Harry Beecher Stowe Center. Catherine, please.
Thank you, Diane. I'd like to mention a group of organizations that we haven't touched on yet, and that is cultural organizations. If we talk about civic engagement, these are groups that bring people together. At the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center, of course, home of Connecticut's First Lady of Literature, we feel that we have a responsibility to convene groups, and we do this regularly, around issues that deserve our consideration. So we do that in a variety of ways on our salons at Stowe, but we also need to think about libraries. We need to think about the other kinds of museums or even performance groups that are bringing up issues that are issues for all of us and that we're all working on. So I hope that as you further this conversation, you'll remember to take it to the grassroots. Val mentioned the importance of conversation, and if we don't convene people together, we're not going to drive the solutions. Thank you.
Stuart Parnes is with us, and Stuart is the head of the Connecticut Humanities Council. Stuart, just to jump on to what Catherine said, the Humanities Council, of course, involved with a lot of museums, historic societies. How do they play into this?
Well, the reason we're here, the reason we're supporting this effort, and the reason I'm thrilled to be on this council, is that we've felt that it's our role, it's been our role for years, to support this kind of civic engagement, civil conversation around important issues that matter to all of us. And so we hope we can continue to be in the forefront of this. And we support, thanks to funding from the state, we support the kinds of cultural organizations around the state that really can draw people in for these kinds of conversations. You know, we're a special state, you know, having 169 independent towns offers a little special flavor to Connecticut that nobody else features. And I think it makes it harder for ourselves sometimes to get together to talk about things. We'd like to stay close to home. Well, this is one situation where staying close to home actually is a really good idea, that if we can connect within our own communities and feel pretty good about that, then I think it's a little easier to take the next step and connect on a state level or on a federal level. So maybe we can turn our 169 little separate fiefdoms into something that would actually help this process along. But the Connecticut Humanities Council is going to continue to support this effort and see if there are ways that we can not only involve our kiddos in school and to strengthen that civic education, but to involve our grown-ups. I think, as you mentioned, we have a lot of grown-ups in the state of Connecticut, and we're getting upper all the time. And I think there's a way to turn them into a really powerful force to connect to the youth and get some things going.
Stuart, thank you. We're just about to wrap up, but I wanted to give each of our panelists a minute to give us their final thoughts. And Martha, I'll start with you.
Sure. This has been a great conversation, and I feel completely energized by the ideas that have come out tonight. I just think that we have a lot of great hope that I sense, and a lot of really interesting ways of looking at the data that is really helping people see how we transcend the engagement piece and connect it to the participation and having a voice and having some power. And so that gives me a lot of hope, because I think in that spectrum we're beginning to see the connections between all those activities, and so I'm looking forward to continued conversations.
Well, thank you for initiating the report and getting us going on this. Teresa Younger?
I would just say, you know, we look at civic engagement, and much of the conversation tonight has been about young people, but we need to look at it over the span of an individual's life and from all different perspectives. And in keeping that in mind, we need to be very, very reflective of the fact that people fought to have a voice. And what we have today and the ability for us to gather was not something that has always been part of our history. And so I think we need to be looking at our older adults to tell their story about civic engagement, civic involvement, and civic participation. And we need to make sure that we connect the generations in this conversation as well as the genders in this conversation, because women are living longer than their male counterparts, and they're making up a greater percentage of the population, and they are also graduating from high schools and colleges at greater rates than our male counterparts, and we need to keep those conversations going, and we need to make sure that the advocates for women are men and women, and the advocates for men are men and women, so that we have a real community conversation going on.
Teresa, thank you. Louisa?
Well,
final thought?
Just to add real quick, and men, please don't take this out of me, but, and I believe it's a substantial study out of the Women in Politics Center out of the Eagleton Institute of Politics in Rutgers, that basically showed that women who are elected to office are different than men in terms of the things that they care about, which lean much more towards children and families. So I think that's something to keep in mind. For me, and I want to thank the Secretary for her leadership as well. In all my years in the field, I've never participated in studies such as this, so I was really, really pleased, and I learned a great deal. I think that for me, in terms of continuing working on this, is to identify the handful of items that we think that we can successfully pursue. Because all of us who have worked in group work and moving communities and things like that know that the one thing that will keep the conversation going is some success, that people feel, oh, doggone it, we can do it. And so that's what I'd like to concentrate on, if I may.
Madam Secretary, I'd like you to have the last word, and I, too, want to thank you for your leadership in being among the only constitutional officer among all the states that have studied civic health, the only constitutional officer to take leadership in that, and I thank you for that.
Well, thanks, Diane, and I'm very pleased to do it, and I'm hoping we can take it nationwide. You know, this is a conversation that we should be having everywhere. I hope that what comes out of this is a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking. I think back in the mid-90s, there's a guy named Jeremy Rifkin, a thinker and economist and so forth, who said at that time, technology is going to put a lot of people out of work. We need to rethink work. We need to rethink how we compensate people and how we think about work. I think the same thing holds true here. We need to rethink participation. What does it really mean? What are people participating in, and how do you sort of get to the gold? How do you get your ideas heard in a larger framework? And that's what everybody wants. And so I hope that what comes out of this is some new ideas, some fresh thinking about how we can really re-engage a lot of people who are bailing out as we speak, because there's so much cynicism out there. So we need to show them that there's hope, that there's things going on. They just need to get plugged in. So, and thank you all really for being here tonight. I really appreciate all your input and everything that you've done for us with this project.
Well,
and
thank you very
Diane.
much. I just want to say that at CTN and at Connecticut's Old State House, our mission is to try to get more people involved in our democracy. So hopefully this is a bit of a step, and I thank you all for being here tonight, including all of our audience. Thank you so much.